I'm really grateful to be partnering with our friends at Kirva tonight on this call, and I am going to turn it over to Rabbi David Jaffe in a couple of minutes. But first, I just want to land us in this moment that we find ourselves in together. Um, I think it is clear to all of us that we are coming together at a really painful and difficult time with the results of the election this week. And I know from folks that I've talked to in my own life and throughout the organization and our partners that everyone is processing and coping with the results of this week differently. Over the past few days, I've heard people express anger, hopelessness, numbness, fear. Some folks have shared their disbelief at how we can be here, and others see these election results as a confirmation of what they've already known to be true about the forces that have been at work in this country for a long time. And I've also heard people who are wanting to just check out, who feel like they've been fighting for 10 years and this just feels like one moment too far. And I think we know that that unfortunately or fortunately is just not an option for us. And even for those of us who have been warning about the threat of rising authoritarianism for a long time, there is a big difference between being prepared in our minds and having to really face yet again that so many people in this country have chosen this path of bigotry and racism, of misinformation, and really of fascism, whether they chose that knowingly or unknowingly. And, we at Bend the Arc really believe that we need to take Trump at his word, that the things that he's threatening to do, that he will do everything he can to enact them. And so we have to be clear-eyed about what we're facing. And we know that our best path to a future where we can be safe and to protecting and saving as many of the things that we believe in and care about is through solidarity with our broader social justice movements and each other. We need to be in this together. We need to study and learn from our history and our movements. There is so much wisdom in the world from people who have lived through moments like these. And while we did not choose to live through this moment, we can choose how we face it. And I don't take for granted the choice that people are making to be here with us tonight. It's really not a small thing to choose to show up and to choose community. And refusing to succumb to despair and continuing to build power and community together truly is one of our most important antidotes to fascism. There are things that we can do right now, here tonight, tomorrow, in the weeks and months to come, to protect ourselves and each other, to fight the worst impacts, to build the world that we want in our home communities where we have control, and to keep organizing for the future that we, our families, and our communities deserve. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi David Jaffe at Kirva, who's going to say a bit more about the work that they do and what we have planned while we're here together this evening.
Jamie, thanks so much for the introduction. So I'm Rabbi David Jaffe, co-founder and director of Kirva. For those who don't know, Kirva integrates traditional Jewish spiritual practices with social justice efforts, empowering both personal spiritual growth and the work of sustainable systemic change. Jamie just mentioned refusing to succumb to despair and continuing to build power together. Jewish spiritual traditions have hundreds of years, if not more, of addressing despair and building power, particularly Musar, which is applied Jewish ethics, and Chassidut, or applied Jewish mysticism, have a lot to say about working through heartbreak, devastation, and despair, and coming out the other side, transforming brokenness into a powerful commitment to repair. My colleague Yehuda Webster will be sharing one of these practices later on tonight as a companion to the political work ahead. And I do want to mention that Kirva is going to be holding a 3-day spiritual immersive in January in advance of the inauguration to build this muscle for what lays ahead. We'll have more information about that at the end of tonight's program. So what we have in store tonight, and we're just delighted to be doing this together with Bend the Arc. Bend the Arc's Gray Hagans is going to offer us political analysis in a minute. I'm going to then teach a piece of traditional Jewish wisdom about fear and working with fear in times like these. Yehuda Webster will lead a practice and share an original piece of music from Kirva's rabbinic intern, Ariel Rivera Corman, first time ever debuting tonight. And Michelle Faris, then Yehuda, will send us off with next steps, both political and spiritual, at the end of the program. So with that, I want to hand over to Gray.
Amen, and thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Jaffe. As folks mentioned, my name is Gray Higgins. I am the Chief Vision Officer here at Bend the Arc. And I'm hopefully not going to take up too much time this evening, because by now folks have heard lots of the hot takes, lots of the commentary. I'm sure you've read now your fair share of both social media posts as well as kind of published think pieces about where we are and what this means. And of course, we'll continue to do that both in a reflective stance as well as looking at what that means for us ahead. But I do want to bring us into the time, place, conditions, or as my colleague Rochelle now says, the TPCs of right now. And when we're looking at the election of this week, we have to look it squarely in the face and say, we lost. And so folks came to this call thinking this was going to be a time in which you were going to hear something else. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but as a colleague recently said to me, they appreciate that I am appropriately negative at the right time. So I hope to be a little bit appropriately negative for just a couple of moments. So again, to say we lost. At this point, we know that we have lost the White House and we have lost the Senate. Counts around the House are still happening. And when I say we lost, I don't just mean the Democratic Party. I mean we, a greater we. The we who still believes in an America that actually lines up with some of the albeit challenging and controversial, and sometimes am allowed to cuss straight up, seemingly gaslighty bullshit words of our founding fathers. But sometimes when we reach towards those words, the idea that all of us are created equal and that there should be a government that actually keeps us in the space of being able to reach for each other and be well together and grow together, and that democracy is something that is worth fighting for, we have to first stop and look at we lost something this week. And we know that in very practical terms, we've lost probably for some time the courts, the federal courts. We know that with control of the Senate, Trump appointees will have an easy time being placed into critical places of government that will impact the lives of millions and millions of people, both in this country and abroad. We know that with a Republican controlled Senate, they will also be able to clear the way for Trump judges in the judiciary system. And we know that it also cleared the way for the legislative agenda of pulling back the Affordable Care Act and cutting corporate taxes, among other things. And we know that with the loss of the White House, that we are on the precipice of a wide-ranging, wide-sweeping overhaul of the federal executive branch through Project 2025 to prioritize loyalty to Trump and the MAGA movements, again, in a way that will impact millions of people in this country and around the world. We've lost a lot. And we know, as many of us know in our bones and our DNA and our kishkas and our wherever else we go to find access to our ancestors and to the wisdom of those who came before us, is that we've been in moments where we've lost a lot before. We've been in moments where it has seemed like there is nowhere forward to go. We've been in moments where it has seemed that it is more appealing to go back to a place that we've romanticized as at least being full of meat and milk. And the joy of being in this work is actually that the place of hope is that we refuse to lose our sense of hope and our sense of purpose and our sense of reaching for one another. And we know that we cannot afford to lose that commitment, the commitment to one another, the commitment that we had the day before the election and a year before the election and 10 years before that. And that hope is a possibility of our future. Because this week we lost, y'all. Clearly, cleanly. And we'll continue to sit and wrestle with the realities of what that means. And we'll continue to look at the rest of the House races. We'll continue to look at what this looks like in the states. We'll continue to look at how governors' houses and legislatures across the states are continuing to wrestle with what does it look like to utilize power to protect the people in your state against an increasingly violent and volatile federal government. And we know that we will continue to be a part of that defense. We will continue to be a part of the movement of people who will continue to choose an America worth fighting for that is for all of us. And we know that part of that work, at least in the immediate term, has to continue to be resisting some of the urge to fall into the hot takes of making meaning of this moment. Not because it's not interesting, not because there's not good data there, not because there's not something to look at to be reflective of who we are and what we missed, but knowing that right now, It is politically expedient and politically useful to continue to fuel our division through fear of one another. We know that the stories right now about one community or another and the way that they've gone for Trump, I will say Trafe, we know also obscures both a reality about what are the central concerns of many of the people as we're challenged in this country right now, but also misses the millions of people who did not turn out to vote for the presidential this year. And the wrestling and the deep curiosity those of us who still believe in democracy must do to actually explore and get closer and more proximate to our neighbors and those in our community. Proximate enough to actually see a pathway forward that includes all of us. And we know that resisting that right-wing agenda of division and fear is on all of us. We know right now that they're using this opportunity of kind of the chaos and the meaning making already to target communities of vulnerable people. From the mass messaging targeting Black Americans, threatening messages to pull folks back to plantation economies, to the current conversation about removing protections for trans Americans. We must wrestle with the damage already done to our country without leaning into the hopelessness and despair that will continue to pull us in that direction. And we should expect, though, that there will continue to be politically charged rhetoric and violence. And again, as I mentioned before, I don't share these things to lead us further into despair, but to support us in staying as clear-eyed as possible. As James Baldwin has said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And this is us facing it together. Because our movements live beyond elections, even devastating ones. Even ones that feel like we're cut off from a possibility of a future that we had been in the dirt struggling for, we'd been in our hearts visioning for, we've been reaching and weeping with each other for so long. We have to remind ourselves that we are all actually still here. And we will move from the mandate of this election that it is ours to protect one another and that our safety will continue to be in solidarity with all those who are impacted by this administration's anti-democratic authoritarian plans to exercise power and privilege on the bodies of many and many of us. I'll actually end with a line from Harris's concession speech earlier this week. I sat down and I waited and kind of somewhat bated breath on how was she going to close out this run for presidency. And I think there's lots to look at on a little over 100-day run for presidency and what was and was not possible. But I remember when Biden stepped down and it became obvious that Harris was going to be the nominee, and the energy suddenly flipped. And it was like the light came on for millions and millions of people. That millions and millions of people suddenly saw a pathway and the excitement of the possibility of the first woman president, amongst other things. That excitement that maybe there was a chance for America to rise back up against MAGA and Trump. That maybe there was a possibility for us to pull this out the bag. And while many of us leaned into the vibes, into the sense of what was possible, again, I want to remind us our movements live beyond elections. That possibility, that spark of light that ignited so many people actually is still present. When Harris conceded earlier this week, she said, "The light of America's promise will always burn bright as long as we never give up and as long as we keep fighting." She said, "This is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves and organize." And finally, she said, "Only when it is dark enough in the night sky can you fully see the stars." And if we're moving towards those dark times, then let's also move towards making room for the stars and making room for the light that is still here, surely, in the millions of us who are still committed to an America that can be, and not resting on America as it has been wrested away from us. So we will continue to resist. We will continue to do so together. We will continue to do so knowing that there is more still possible. There is more time still possible than the time that is behind us. And towards the end of this call, my colleague Rachel will lay out some more about how we plan to hold the line and how you can get involved, how you can bring your light to the darkness of the sky as we continue to resist, as we continue to show up for one another, knowing that now, just like the day before the election and just like the day before that, our jobs were still the same, to keep choosing one another. And that I believe we will continue to do. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Gray. I want to pick up on some words Gray said. Harris's in her speech about the darkness of the night. You may have heard this teaching from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, teacher of the Hasidic tradition 200 years ago, who I think referred to that dark night as a very narrow bridge, and saying the whole world is a very narrow bridge. And the main thing is not to be overcome by fear. So people may be feeling in mourning now, or seeing that in the chat. I certainly have been feeling that. All kinds of different emotions could be coming up. And fear could be one of them, and especially depending on your, societal position, positionality, identity, the body you walk in, that fear could be more intense or less intense, as Gray just explained, of who's particularly going to be targeted in this coming period, that we all need to stand up and protect each other. But so fear is something that's here. And I wanted to bring this teaching because we're going to feel fear, and that happens. You have emotions. But what happens to those emotions, and how do we work with them? And so this teaching, again, is known, very known in the world as, and I don't know if we can share this in some way, but if not, I'll just speak it. There's a song that people may know. It says, "The whole world's a narrow bridge, but the main thing is not to fear, or not to fear at all." And that's actually a misinterpretation of, or a paraphrase of what Rabbi Nachman of Breslov actually wrote. What he wrote was that no, a person needs to cross a very, very narrow bridge, and the main thing is not to be overcome by fear, not to take the fear and build on it. And this may be something you've experienced. I certainly do it, where something scary might happen, and then I'll add to it, and I'll make up all kinds of stories, and I'll build on that fear to a point where I might become paralyzed. And in Hebrew, there's a word, a form of a verb that's called reflexive, where you do something to yourself. And so the word Rabbi Nachman uses is yitpached, to actually make oneself fear. And that is, okay, thank you for sharing that. If we could see on the screen that we see that the word here used is yitpached, not to be overcome or make oneself fear in itself. And that's really the spiritual task, I think. One of the spiritual tasks we have before us right now is that whatever fear we might be feeling, or what's coming at us, or we might feel, how can we work with that and use it to motivate us as opposed to shutting us down? And one of the ways, or ways that we can work with this, is to really stay in reality. And there's a number of ways people can do this. One thing I do, one thing is that Rabbi Nachman taught, is that when you're feeling a fear come up, maybe overcome, to look around the room, notice what's there, and name what you're seeing in reality, in the space at the moment. There are many other techniques to stay connected to reality. Connecting with people with whom you feel safe, spending time in nature, watching the trees, watching the sun, watching things that move slowly, being playful and playing. All these things can keep us in reality, even when there are actual scary things happening and we feel that fear. There's another word in Hebrew that relates to fear called yirah. Yirah is kind of an awe, and it's different in a way from maybe when we feel scared about something, it's actually sharp and motivational and makes us more aware of our surroundings. And we're going to need to be very aware of our surroundings. But that's based in reality, to be able to see what is and what is not actually happening. And that's going to be part of our task in these coming months, is to see what is actually happening and not just what's happening in our head. So I want to turn this over to my colleague Yehuda Webster, who will share a particular Jewish spiritual practice about how we can work with a phrase like this to be able to bring it into our hearts and really be able to stay grounded in reality while we're going to be doing the political fights that we need to be having over the coming months and years. So with that, I'll turn it to Yehuda.
Peace, everybody. So good to be with you all. My name is Yehuda Webster. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm with the Kirva team as senior faculty. Thank you so much. It's really good to be here in community with everybody in this time. Really appreciating what you put out here, Gray, and the teaching that you're sharing with us, Rabbi David, right? That the reality is grim, and there is a lot to fear, right? And in some ways, that fear is important register for the direness of the situation. And yet, it is incumbent upon us to not let that fear overwhelm us to the point of apathy or paralysis. So we're going to use a Musar practice called Hitpa'alut, or in Yiddish, Hispilus, to integrate this principle into our lives of feeling the fear, the very reasonable fear in this moment, and yet building the spiritual grit to not allow it to overwhelm us to a place of apathy or paralysis. Now, Hitpa'alut or Hispilus is one of the core Musar practices that we work with to bridge the gap between what the head knows and what the heart feels. Yeah. One of the founders of the modern Musar movement, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he would teach that the mere acquisition of knowledge isn't enough to change our behaviors, to transform how we live out our values in the world, right? By no malicious fault of ourselves, we learn something that's really important that we resonate with, and we forget, right? It's not integrated into our very being. And so he says we have to take the principles and inculcate it in our heart, bound and join it so that the principle, the value is imprinted on our souls, such that when we need it, it is available to us. We can reach and embody it. If you'll see on the source sheet that was up before, I don't know if we can get that back up, that the word hitpa'alut, the verb, the root of that means to work, to do. And it comes in a similar reflexive form that Rabbi David was just talking about with the yitpached. So it's not just the meaning of the word, but it's how that word reflects back on you. So hitpa'alut doesn't just mean to work, but it means to actively work on yourself, to transform how we show up with ourselves and others around us. If we just scroll down a little bit, we'll see there we go. Thank you. All right. So the hitpa'alut practice approach to this transformation is the conscious awakening of the heart through a somewhat kind of fervent recital of the principle, the values that we hope to embody and be, that we want to integrate into our very being, such that it is imprinted on our souls and that those principles then become available to us as we need to employ them. So I want to walk you through the key steps of Hispilus. You'll see here on the screen, step 1 is to analyze and learn the source, right? Understand what the words are And we did that. Rabbi David just led us through that, right? So now we understand the difference between to be afraid and to make yourself even more afraid, right? Step two is to relate the source to your life. Right? How does this speaking, the teaching, the principle, the value, how does it relate to you, this moment, the struggle of justice? How does it relate to the world and you in it? We haven't done this part yet. I'll invite us to do it in just a moment. And then step three is to actually do the action of hispilus, of that bringing the principle to life through a conscious awakening of the heart. Keeping in mind the instances that you want to be able to embody this principle that you're trying to integrate into your very being. Everybody's different. Everyone's going to need to use a slightly different modality to this hipa'alut or hispilus practice. So here's a few different options for you. Option number one is what we like to call an anchor phrase. This is where you can do this in a bit of a slow and deliberate manner. If we could scroll back up just a little bit so we can see the half of the page. Okay. So we're going to be working with this phrase in the middle, right? Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od v'ha'ikar lo lehipached klal. Okay, so we're working with that famous Hebrew phrase, right? But we are inserting back in the original Hebrew. The world is a very narrow bridge, but the main thing is to not be overcome by fear. So the kind of anchor phrase version to do this is slow and deliberate. You say, the whole world is a very narrow bridge, but the main thing is to not be overcome by fear. The main thing is not to be overcome by fear. The main thing is not to be overcome by fear. This is a bit of a long phrase, so you might want to hone in on a particular element that you're trying to really work into yourself, right? I was taught a more fervent recital of this, and where it's a bit of a self-talk mode. So I invite you to stand in either body or spirit. And when you do it, if you wanted to do it this way, and this is really letting yourself over to the meaning of the phrase and how it applies to your life. So I'm really going to work with that last part. The main thing is to not be overcome by fear. The main thing is to not be overcome by fear. I get to be afraid, but don't be overwhelmed by the fear. I'm afraid, but don't be overcome by it. Don't give in to paralysis, apathy. Don't be overwhelmed by fear. The main thing is not be overwhelmed, not be overwhelmed. It's not about getting rid of fear. It's about not being overwhelmed by the fear. What am I afraid of? Don't let it overwhelm. Don't let it overwhelm. What am I afraid of? The main thing is not to be overwhelmed by fear. Okay, so in that mode, you can really give yourself over to the modality of a more fervent recital of the phrase. And the last one, we can stop this screen share and we can open up our rabbinic intern, good colleague and friend, Ariel Corman, who's also a Musar practitioner. She has put together original music to the Hebrew that, again, has been shared on that source sheet. And so singing is another way to really inculcate a principle and imprint it on your soul. Please.
This is Rabbi Nachman's little song. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tar me'od. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tar me'od. Kol ha'olam kulo גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל, והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, 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 והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל, והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, וכל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד.
Beautiful. So in a moment, we're going to invite you to try on this practice with us to really build the spiritual grip and resource that is needed for the weeks and months ahead to feel the fear, but not be overwhelmed by it. You can use any of the versions of Hitpalut, Hispilus that you saw demonstrated, whether that's slow and deliberate or in that more fervent mode of self-talk, or you can sing along to or with Ariel's melody, beautiful melody that she put to the words, to the Hebrew. So what we're going to do is in a moment, we're going to give 30 seconds to a minute for everyone to identify a place in your life where you are afraid in this moment. And you can identify a context where you could become overwhelmed and you could start to overwhelm others with your fear. And think about, well, what's grounding you to keep you from becoming overcome by that fear? And then we'll step in and we'll do the Hispailu practice. That's the invitation for about 3.5 minutes. On this main screen, we'll have playing Ariel's melody for those who want to sing along to that. For everybody else, if you're trying to do the more slow, deliberate version or your own fervent chant, however you want to do it, you can either turn off the sound of your computer, or actually, they used to have these things, Musar houses, where everyone would do it all together. And there's something about the cacophony of the sound that actually can help you drop in, right? So you could actually try out keeping the sound on your computer on, but doing your own thing, okay? But for now, let's take a moment and think about that fear that could overwhelm you. And just as an example, right now, I'm feeling a lot of fear around the mass deportations, feeling a lot of fear about these text messages that have been sent around to Black and brown folks, a lot of fear about some of the ballots that were struck down, that California just chose to enshrine slavery for incarcerated people. So I think for me, the anchor is just that we're so much more capable with drawing from spiritual power and connecting to Hashem and staying in community So that's my anchor. And so that's when I'm beholding the context I'm beholding as I do this focus raise. So I invite you to just take a moment and just ground in that. And then in about 30 seconds, we'll start our Palut practice. So if we can get that up on the screen, we'll get started in about 30 seconds.
כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, 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 והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל, והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, 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 והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל, והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, 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 והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל, והעיקר לא להתפחד, לא להתפחד כלל. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, וכל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד.
Allowing 30 seconds to allow that energy to metabolize through our bodies, Take some deep breaths. That I'll pass it to Rochelle to bring us through some action steps for the week, months ahead.
Thank you, Yehuda. Thank you, Ariel, who I'm not sure is on this call, but if you are, we needed that. I needed that. Uh, so I want to offer another layer of how we are not overcome by our fear, right? Yehuda put forward some spiritual grounding that we can all use and reach for. We have our intellectual analysis, our meaning making, our understanding of the moment that we're in that Gray shared so eloquently, and then there are also steps, action steps, things that we can very practically do with that analysis, with that grounding, as a way to move our power into influencing and trying to make real something other than the situation we find ourselves in. And so, what are the different types of tools that we have at our disposal to not be overcome by fear, or to phrase it in the more affirmative, to be grounded in our courage? Um, I know for me, and I think probably for everyone who came onto this call, one of the draws for this call was the combination of analysis and spirituality, spiritual grounding, and a plan toward action. And for me, in many ways, those things taken together are some of the most incredible manifestations of our love. And I feel like love is something that we have at our disposal to be grounded in our courage, to not be overcome by fear. Love of ourselves, love of our families, love of our communities, love of things that are larger than us. Uh, and that one of the most powerful tools for expressing and engaging in that love is actually being in relationship deepening, relationship extensions, relationship growing is one of the most greatest and powerful ways for us to actually take and transform the energy that comes up in us from fear and move it into something that manifests more positive, more tangible, more powerful kinds of emotions, the emotions of love. And I was reading some of the comments earlier, and I read one of the comments about it not so much being paralysis by fear, but the sheer magnitude of what we understand is ahead of us now, and the overwhelm that can come from comprehending or attempting to comprehend all of the fronts of fights that we know we've been on already, and that they will explode and open up with a force that we've not yet experienced. I know I haven't in my lifetime, near 50 years here. And so it's not necessarily the fear, but it is the sheer overwhelm. And one of the ways to face or combat that overwhelm is for us to be grounded in love, connected in our relationships, and clear that we each are not expected to do everything. that we each are not expected to have our fingers, our hands, our minds, our hearts spread like tentacles, stretched thin into every single fight that may be in front of us, into everything that pulls our heart, that calls on us to open our mouths and put our voice forward for this or step forward and forward for that. We don't each have to be present for every single battle that will be in front of us. That is why relationship and solidarity are the most powerful tools that we have. That is why maintaining our connection with each other is as necessary as it is. We couldn't possibly be present, each one of us individually, for everything, but we do have to stay in it in whatever way we're able to bring our energy, our love, our commitment. And in order to make sure that we can have impact on many things at one time, it requires that we be in solidarity with one another. Sorry. That we, you know, Gray named earlier that our movement work. Elections are one way in which we see our work to our love, our work together, our relationships manifest in elections. They're actually one small flash. In this country, there's an enormous amount of time and energy that gets poured into them. And it's not to devalue them or say that they're not important, because they very clearly, the end results of them have real impact on the material conditions of each of our lives and the lives of people who we love and care for. But they are one manifestation of how we grow and wield power, one manifestation of how we ensure that our voice and our values get represented. And oftentimes the machinery or the mechanics of elections get invested in and get propped up at the expense of clear traditional organizing. The very thing that allows for the end result of an election to be what it is actually the organizing that happens behind the scenes. And when it's done in a way that is a true investment in our connections and our relationships, not surface, not wholly relying on digital communications, but conversations with our family members at our dinner tables, in our synagogues, with the parents of the children, of the children who our children go to school with, the people who live around the corner for us, in our building, in the supermarkets. When that is the quality, the feel of organizing we lean into, that's the stuff that our dreams and our futures are actually made of. That's the place that we all have control over and at our disposal to be able to lean into and do listening and ask questions and get to places of understanding. So I know today, coming off of last week, one of the things that I found myself like reaching for and longing for, and saw a lot of people reaching for, was, okay, but what's next? What is the next step? Where do I sign? What do I pass along or post to my social media? What am I building to be able to be in the streets? Where do I go to get trained? What do I read? What am I learning? What is next? And sometimes the clearest, sharpest answer of what's next is for us to actually be quiet and be in conversation with ourselves, with our bodies and our hearts, and with the people who are closest to us. And so, even if there's not a next thing to do, there is always actually a next thing to do. It may be smaller than you expect it to be. It may be insular. It may, not speak to or satisfy the need to be out there and present and angry and rageful and be witnessed by others, but the witnessing of ourselves, the embracing of ourselves, the quieting of our own minds and bodies, the connecting with our people is always a next step that is available to us no matter what. So I am actually going to speak about some next steps that do take us out of our homes and out of our bodies and into other things. But I wanted to first remind myself and all of us that we have that very traditional organizing, power building, relationship building that begins with ourselves and begins with the people who we love most, always available to us as a next step. I also want to say something about Kamala's concession speech and something that I've heard Biden talk about over these last several days as a lead up to some of what is next for us to do. There was there has been a lot of weight given by both of them and many others to the peaceful transition of power, to sort of corralling all of us, themselves and all of us, into this container of being politically astute or politically correct or the grown-ups in the room, and that there will be a peaceful transition of power. And there's something very important about that. I think that it matters to us that uh, that it matters to the values that we hold and the vision that we have for our future, that there be peaceful transitions of power. But to me, and I don't think to any of us on that call, that does not mean powerless transitions of power. And there was a way in which I've heard it said by Kamala, by Biden, by others that has made me angry because I have no desire to be handed over to some other force to have done to me and my communities and my families what may come. So there may be a peaceful transition of power. There will not be a powerless transition of power. We are not going quietly into any good night. And part of the steps for us to take now are about getting ready for a powerful transition of power that has us grounded in the voice and in the power and in the relationships and love that we've been building all up until this moment and are going to keep carrying with us when we're on the other side of inauguration. So I want to call all of us into a powerful transition of power that may be peaceful, but we're bringing everything we've got into this. And the next moment deserves nothing less than that. So, with that, I'm going to offer a few concrete things for folks who want to get involved. And I will ask that one of my tech colleagues on the call grab the links for each of the pieces that I'm sharing and drop them in the webinar so that folks have a concrete place to go and be able to sign up. First is that there is still ballot curing happening. We are actually still in active election season. There are House races yet to be determined. For folks who don't may not know what ballot curing is, it's essentially ensuring the validity of a ballot. Calling someone, it could be via text, but there is still ballot curing happening, and there is still a need for people to raise their hands and be volunteers to ensure that every ballot that was cast gets counted in these final elections. Because how things with the House shake out does determine some of the power that we'll have in the chambers of Congress and what might be possible when we're on the other side of inauguration. Folks should know the ballot curing link that you get is happening through Bend the Arc, and we are doing C4 ballot curing. We are calling Democrats, we are calling Working Families Party folks. We are not doing open calls to Republicans to make sure that they have enough folks and power on that end to go ahead and cure their own ballots. We are doing C4 ballot curing. So just know that before you sign up and raise your hand to volunteer. Second is Bend the Arc in particular, as a base building organization, right? Bend the Arc is different than Kirva in that we are seeding and building chapters of folks who will be engaged in elections, who get engaged in local power building and fights at their local level and at the federal level. And we have a set of chapters throughout the country. And so if you've been drawn to Bend the Arc's work without necessarily knowing that there was a chapter in your city or in your state or in your region, you can go ahead and check out the link where our chapters exist and get in touch with some of our core leaders and go and participate in a chapter meeting or get involved in a local batch of work happening in the chapters. Another step that folks can take is, and this is connected to uh, bigger picture strategy around how we take on the next 4 years and beyond. Another step that you can take is volunteer to engage with local Jews, other local Jews, and institutions who are going to be working to hold the line where you live, to hold the line in our communities and our states. And by hold the line, I mean especially in places that are blue states where we have elected representation, infrastructure, institutions that have been talking about and trying to prepare themselves for this situation for many, many months, some for way longer than many months. We want to bring our capacities into that state infrastructure, into those institutions, bring our blood, sweat, and tears into those spaces to make sure that when MAGA attacks come from the federal level or from other states with folks who've got values aligned with TRAIF and not with us, with Trump and not with us, that we are giving all the support possible to our own state and community infrastructure to be able to resist. We want to resist and defy the things that go against our values as much and as often as possible. And so Ben the Ark has been in a number of strategy building rooms and is a movement partner to a way broader movement of organizations that are part of the Fight Back table. Some folks may have joined the Fight Back table call on Thursday night. The Fight Back table includes Movement for Black Lives and the Working Families Party and Indivisible and United We Dream and Ben the Ark and many, 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 many other organizations who are in deep conversation now about what resistance to the MAGA agenda will look like writ large, and where are the levers of power and places where we actually still have strongholds and actually still have and can build more power to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and our communities and our families. And then the last thing I'll say is stay tuned for another Come Y'all meeting that we're pulling together for the 19th of this month, where there will be even more details about this strategy. For holding the line in our particular states, for moving some demands. Folks are calling it YOLO Joe, you only live once Joe, right? Making some asks, some demands of the Biden administration to be strategic and smart about putting in place some measures that cannot easily be undone once we're on the other side of inauguration, and not hand us gently over into that good night to help us in our powerful transition of power to the other side of being in the reality of this 47th president. Um, and so I believe I'm closing us out. Yes, Jason? That was the last of our action steps. I think that everything, okay, Yehuda, am I handing it back to you? I'm happy to hand it back to you. I thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for the work that we're going to be able to do together and that I feel confident we will be powerful in doing together. And Yehuda, I'm handing it back to you.
Thank you so much for that powerful, powerful call to action, Michelle. Really, really feel invigorated and motivated to keep the fight going, right? And to come together as a powerful community, right? Despite that transition of power that we're going to, of course, allow to happen. And so, speaking of, to really do the thing that Michelle really spoke to of organizing most effectively and to have the resilience in the fight. Kirva, we are hosting somewhat of an emergency spiritual immersive to build resilience for our Trump presidency. We held our first spiritual immersive over the summer with 25 folks. We want to open this up to as many folks as possible to get the spiritual nourishment and the grit to be able to be best prepared for the fight ahead, right? Come inauguration. And so this would happen in early January. And, it's a 4-day deep dive into really exercising our spirits through mental learning, physical movement, and of course, soul exercises. So please be sure to let us know if you would like to join us and the community in building our spiritual capacity for the fight ahead. Generally, if you'd like to be a part of this growing movement of integrating Jewish spiritual wisdom and practice to support our efforts and efficacy in our organizing for justice, you'd like to bring us to your community, there's an interest form that we'll place in the chat for that. And if you found today helpful, this practice that we did, we're also going to include links to the practice, to the teaching that Rabbi David gave over, to the steps for doing the hitpa'alut or hispilus, working on oneself, imprinting principles and values on the soul. And we'll also include the audio recording. And thank you again, Ariel, for that beautiful rendition of Rabbi Nachman's words, right? And so you can use that recording as a way to, again, inculcate this message to not be overwhelmed by fear in your heart, in your spirit. And there's a couple other neat ways to remind you of doing that, getting that up on your phone screen, and so on and so forth. So really looking forward to the next steps as we move forward together as community. And with that, I'm happy to pass it back over to Jamie and Rabbi David. Thank you all.
Thank you, Yehuda. Thank you all so much. Thanks to all of our just incredible leaders tonight. And one thing that gives me an incredible amount of hope is that I get to work and strategize and move with these amazing people. And that is really, it's a gift. Rabbi David and I thought we'd come back on for just a couple of minutes to address a few of the things that have been coming up in the chat, just to wrap us up. And one thing that we were talking about behind the scenes is just how many people have just named their anger as like as a lead emotion that they're feeling right now, that feels like we weren't talking about as much this evening as we were talking about fear. And so I'm going to hand it to you first, Rabbi. Do you have any thoughts on how people navigate the anger that they're feeling, and particularly directed anger towards people who may have voted for Trump, may have other Jews who voted for Trump, you know, folks who people I would say probably feel both angry and a little betrayed by?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll be talking about all night. I think acknowledging, letting yourself have those emotions, and some emotions are more acceptable than others, and for some people, and whether depending on how they were brought up in their families or how they're socialized, anger can be particularly one that you're supposed to suppress. And so to be able to just acknowledge it, let yourself feel it, you don't have to push it down and suppress it. That's on the one hand. And then there's what to do with it and what you're going to do with it. And of course, we want our anger to be motivational. And if we're talking about actually people who we're in relationship with and family members, or maybe it's people in our communities. I certainly have people in my community I'm very angry with. There's a way of, we have a framework we work with we've adapted from Valerie Kaur, the civil rights activist work, Revolutionary Love. We call it balance of care. And we care for self, care for fellow who's been targeted by oppression, and care for opponent. And after you kind of process some of your own anger, if you are going to actually try to reach out and be in relationship, there's kind of things you can do there, as far as like writing a letter, for example. Like, try to write a letter to maybe someone that you wanted to speak to. You're not necessarily going to send it to them, but that's a way of working through some of that anger first before engaging, if you're going to be engaging with them. So again, I'm just saying, it's okay, have it, feel it, experience it, and then work with what's going to be an effective way to connect with someone if you're trying to reach across that divide.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. I agree. And I think, the only other thing I would offer is, we are a time where there are real divisions, and there are people who are making choices right now that might be happening for a lot of different reasons, but the outcome and the impact of those choices is that they are hurting people that we love. And so, I think some anger is really justified. And I agree that the question is, what do we do with it? Where do we channel it? And I would say we should be spending so much more time focusing on our potential allies, on the people who might not agree with us 100%, but are going to be with us in this bigger fight, than the people who we can't move right now. There is plenty of complicated, difficult conversations to have among the people that we agree with. And those are the people we need to be building with right now, among the people who we agree with at the biggest picture level. And so I would just encourage us to think about our own communities, the people we live closest to, the people who maybe we have been having a struggle with around how they've been navigating anti-Semitism this year, but we understand that we are together in this bigger fight. I saw that question come up in the chat too. And to be both interrogating our own lines and assumptions, and really trying to have those hard conversations that we need to have, because the only way we're going to get through this is by building the biggest tent we can build against the forces that are moving in this country.
Yeah, I love that. I totally affirm that. And one thing to do, right? We have to move forward together. We have a common enemy, common target that we're trying to move against, and we have these differences possibly on, as you mentioned, vis-a-vis Israel, Palestine, other things that we need to be actually in coalition. And if we could take that anger that might be there at each other and then to actually turn that outward and not at each other, I think it's going to be really important.
Yeah.
And so I want to totally affirm that a lot of our both spiritual, emotional, other work should go towards how we're going to move in coalition together.
Yeah. I think we probably have time for one more question. I don't know, Jason, if there's something you want to please address, how we will know when we need to leave. And do we try to reach across the divide? Yeah, I mean, I think I think all of us are sitting with some of those questions right now, but I think that first of all, I think that there are a lot of really brilliant thinkers and historians about the stages of fascism that we should be looking to. And I also think at this stage, like, there is a lot to fight for here still. And I think we all need to be educating ourselves, talking to each other, following like organizations that track these trends, that understand them. I think there's going to be a complex how we figure out what news and how we kind of get our news in this new time period. But yeah, I mean, it's a great question that I don't feel like I have a clear answer to yet, but it's certainly something that I know a lot of people are thinking about right now. And I think we spoke about whether or not to reach across the divide. I think that it depends on what divide we're talking about, right? I think there are divides we have to reach across, and I think there are divides that are too wide right now to be the starting point.
If I could just add to that, Jamie, I think fascists and a fascist regime wants people to be divided from each other, and so I would agree. There's some divides we're not going to go across here, but there are many we I think need to,
Yeah.
and that is actually an anti-fascist action to actually
Yes.
stay in connection. So I would lean that direction.
I agree. Yeah, thank you, Dave. So I see a lot of questions coming up around anti-Semitism in the chat, and here's what I'm going to say about that. Bend the Arc has a lot of resources and trainings about how we orient to anti-Semitism in this time, and how to navigate anti-Semitism, how to navigate the ways that anti-Semitism is being used to divide and break people apart. And we have trainings that we'll be offering in the future. So I think that is another longer conversation, but we would love for you to stay in it with us and check out the resources that we have to offer on that in the meantime. And I think with that, we're gonna close out. Thank you all again so much for being here with us tonight. Thank you to Gray and Huda and David and Rochelle, and for everyone who helped pull this space together. And look out for next steps. We will be here with you as we keep finding our way through in this moment.
Thanks so much, Jamie. Thanks everyone for being here tonight.